Hey guys, we're in Missouri, the United States state of Missouri, and we are in a part of Missouri where maybe something very silly happened. Look behind me, look at all those blocks. Those are really sizable blocks, aren't they? We're talking multiple, some of them up to 10 feet under the tree there. It's a huge block of granite. Most of them are sedimentary rock, as you can tell from their flatness and their sort of cubic form, which is of course shaped along the sedimentary layers of that sedimentary rock. And so, yeah, that's funny, right? You know, one of the ways that we could get this kind of deposit, if you want, of these big blocks, because these are not weathered in place. These are really, they've been deposited here. You can kind of see if you get closer, if you look at them in context. One of the ways that you can get a deposit of truly giant rocks is a truly giant flood, right? And one of the ways that we can get, one of the most prominent ways I would say that we can get very, very large floods is when glacial lakes, so lakes that have been dammed by ice, by ice caps, by glaciers, when they burst through the ice margin, there it goes. All the water of the lake behind the ice now floods in one big go. And that, of course, has a tremendous power. If the lake is very large, it will take longer. It has more powerful. If the lake is a bit smaller, of course, it has less power. And these occurrences, actually, Glacial Lake Outburst Floods, or GLOFs, for those that love acronyms, those are actually relatively common. Where you have ice caps and where you have glaciers. And so the biggest one, the most famous one, is the Missoula flood, or actually there are many Missoula floods in sequence. So the Missoula Glacial Lake Outburst floods are worth a few minutes of your Google time. But they shaped, I would say, a large fraction of the Northwest, especially the Columbia Basin, down all the way down to Washington, Washington State, of course. So is that what we're looking at here? And these things, by the way, they're not rare. They've occurred all around the world where there are glaciers. Almost, you would say, there are glacial lake outburst floods. Kansas, of course, as you may know, has had a giant glacial lake, but we don't believe that lake has experienced a glacial lake outburst flood. It was blocked by a glacier or an ice cap, really, many ice ages ago, but there's no evidence that has broken through in this flooding fashion, in this sudden fashion. It seems to have gone more calmly. But then here, Missouri. This is not a glacial lake outburst flood deposit. These blocks aren't. And that's for the simple reason that there's not been a glacier here that has blocked sufficient water to create such a flood. In fact, there's not been a glacier here at all, as far as we know, not in the last several glacials, right? So not during the last ice age, as far as we can tell. And by the way, we are now in South Missouri. So what is this? With this deposit of sedimentary rock and granite pieces reflects the local geology, that it does, as that suggests that the provenance here is relatively local, and it is true that the provenance is relatively local. Behind me, this valley over there, that valley is leading up to a mountaintop lake that is part of a pumped water scheme, a pumped storage scheme, where if there is excess electricity, we pump the water up to a high reservoir. When we need electricity, we let the water flow down and create electricity with turbines. This is a fantastic scheme by itself. There's in many places in the world. It's always fun to see a lake on top of a mountain. That's kind of funny. It's just kind of not where it's supposed to be. But that lake, right up there, flooded in December 2005 and sent 1.5 billion gallons of water down this relatively short distance here. It's just 1.5 miles, if I'm correct. You can't quite see the lake, but it's really around the corner, right over on that side. Sent 1.5 billion gallons of water down this relatively steep valley, and that is what dislodged all these giant pieces of rock. So they were not a glacial outburst flood deposit. They are I guess you should say, mountaintop lake outburst flood deposit. Maybe we can make an acronym out of that, but it's obviously much rarer, something that's usually engineered against in successful fashion. In this case, that failed. But yeah, that's what we're looking at. The deposit of that giant flood that came thundering down that valley, spreading out over here as it approached a larger valley with a flat bottom floor. Of course, that's why the deposition happened, and that's why there's no subsequent further transport. Then most of the water went behind me to that side, that's downstream, this new larger valley that we're now in. And kind of lost its energy there. Of course, it did still a lot of damage, and a lot of that is still visible if you know where to look. But the big impact here are these giant blocks that have been dumped right when that water initially thundered down and then had to slow down as it approached this bigger valley and could finally spread out a little bit. Then you dump that deposit. Super cool stuff. You should go here. Well, Johnson Shut-ins, Missouri.